Here's officially welcoming everybody. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are joining from. Thank you so much for joining today for our workshop on Ship to Coast, Blue Economy and Sustainable Livelihood. We're very excited that this workshop is finally taking place digitally, if not on site. And then even though we cannot meet you in person, I hope we're able to have really nice interactive exchanges here. So my name is Adishri Jamkhedkar. I'm the program manager at the German Center for Research and Innovation. Some of you have been hearing from me in the last couple of days. And I would like to, from the DWIH, welcome you. As you know, the DWIH promotes German research landscape in India and also facilitates access to Indian research and innovation ecosystem, including funding and cooperation opportunities, and we also provide a platform for networking and thematic exchanges such as these. At the outset, I would like to give a very big and warm thank you to the German Maritime Museum, especially to Dr. Katharina Botha, who's a research fellow at the German Maritime Museum, who has been the co-organizer of this workshop and has been conceptualizing this for a very long time. So we're happy that this is working out. Thank you so much, Katharina. Say special thanks to the chair of the event that we have here, Dr. Vikram Mathura, who is the head of the research CNED at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you so much, Vikram, for taking over and chairing this session today and also your inputs. Thank you also to Dr. Sven Bergman, who's also going to be one of the moderators today at our breakout sessions. And also very warm welcome to the other guests and the special guests that we have here, namely Dr. Kleingärtner, who is the director of the German Maritime Museum. And with that, I would also like to introduce the team that is here behind. That is, for now, my colleague Ms. Garima Behal, who handles communications at the DWIH. She's here in the background helping you out. So please, in case you have any technical trouble, please address her. We might have another colleague joining in later. And I would like to herewith also thank the main guest again, who is Dr. Michelle Flitner, who's the chair of the Arctic Sustainability Research Center at the University of Bremen, who's a keynote speaker. So thank you so much for taking time out from your clashing meetings and busy schedules for today. Thank you for giving us also time. And I would now request Dr. Katharina Botha to take over from here and introduce the rest of the speakers and moderate the section.
Thank you very much, Adishri. Thank you very much indeed for hosting us today. Thank you all the colleagues from the DWIH and Dr. Lash. We are delighted to partner with you to bring scholars from Germany and India together and discuss sustainability in the blue economy from an international and interdisciplinary perspective. So, on behalf of the German Maritime Museum, may I
thank you very much, respected chairperson for this program, Dr. Mathura.
Welcome address, please.
Our partner, Dr. Lash of DWIH, our key speaker from the German Embassy in India, Mr. von Ritter, distinguished participants. On behalf of the German Maritime Museum, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you at this digital workshop today. This is an important event that deserves attention even as the pandemic has many of us focusing on its management and response. Last month, in September, the German government has announced ambitious and forward-looking Indo-Pacific policy guidelines. Germany and its institutions regard this region to be vital to peace, prosperity, and to find solutions for our common humanity. These policy guidelines recognize the importance for this region in combating climate change and marine pollution, and for Germany to work with countries in this region. India is at the heart of this new geography and indeed is shaping the region decisively. The new guidelines are clear, that we must work together to strengthen the rule of law and human rights and must enhance exchange in the cultural, education and scientific spheres. This is where we, the German Maritime Museum, will fit in. We are a Leibniz Institute for Maritime History and one of 8 Leibniz research museums in Germany. With faculty of over 100 and around 8,000 square meters of covered exhibition space, we are one of the largest maritime museums in Europe. Maritime research is at the core of our work, and we maintain a variety of cooperation with universities, colleges, and non-university research institutions. This workshop today is an Indian-German partnership to work on crucial questions around social inclusion in the maritime economy, climate change and coastal communities, and gender dimension within the blue economy. What we learned together today, the network that we are able to develop, and the other projects that this interaction may inspire, we all help in the larger debate that will shape the future of the Indo-Pacific and indeed of partner countries such as Germany. I want to convey my gratitude to our partner, the DWIH New Delhi, for co-organizing this workshop on blue economies and sustainable livelihood with us. I would like to especially thank Professor Michael Flitner from the University of Bremen, and indeed who works with the museum very closely, for delivering the keynote address on the role of research in fostering sustainability in the blue economy today. And I want to welcome and thank each of the 26 maritime scholars and experts from all over India and Germany who will enrich the discussion today. I hope this is the first of our many engagements together. We are planning to invite you all to help establish a network of maritime scholars and engage in research and workshops, and have you with us at our museum in Bremerhaven soon. I wish you all a very productive day and look forward to seeing you all. Namaste.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Kleingeltner, for your opening remarks, for taking the time to be with us today and to welcome each of the participants from India and Germany here. Let me now introduce our moderator and chairperson, Dr. Vikram Mathura. Dr. Mathura is an anthropologist of science, technology and the environment. His research interests include the governance of emerging technologies, social and cultural dimensions of technological transitions, cultural, social perceptions of environmental risks, and dynamics between science and policy and cultural theory. Dr. Mathura brings an interdisciplinary perspective to complex challenges of sustainability. He received his Doctor of Philosophy degree from Oxford University, Institute for Science, Society and Innovation. Dr. Mathura is also founding director of Tandem Research Goa, senior fellow of the Observer Research Foundation, one of Asia's biggest think tanks, and fellow of the Stockholm Environment Institute in Sweden. Dr. Mathura, the mic is yours.
Okay, wonderful, Katrina. Thank you so much for the introduction, and just very quickly, very happy to be here and welcome you all to this session. And I'm sure I'll get to know all of you over the course of the day. I've been looking at the bios and it looks really exciting. So really looking forward to the conversations. I think the speakers before me have already in some sense framed the problem or the question of the day quite well, but essentially I think the blue economy is beginning to receive a lot of attention, and I think that's a great thing. It's on the political high table. Lots of conferences and research is going on around the blue economy, but obviously we need to think about and so that is bringing in more investment into the blue economy, but I think at the same time it's important to really highlight some of the challenges of this new drive to develop the blue economy. And I think one of them which comes out in the course of this workshop is very much the extent to which the blue economy actually benefits the coastal communities that have been living on it, living off the oceans for ages. And equally important, I think, are issues around climate change and the impact of climate change on coastal infrastructure and coastal livelihoods. And I think that's something that's going to come out in the course of the day. And then finally, I think really important to stress that we have to think about vulnerable groups, vulnerable social groups, and what is the differential impact of the changes in our oceans, in our blue economy. And from that lens, I think the gender perspective would be really exciting conversation towards the later half of the workshop. So that's very broadly some interventions from me. So I'm really quite excited about this, and I don't want to take much more time at this stage. And very quickly, I want to introduce to you our keynote speaker. So Professor Michael Flitner is a professor of human geography at the University of Bremen in Germany. He's the chair of the Sustainability Research Center and a co-founder of the Bremen Nature Cultures Lab. It sounds really interesting to me. He has worked on as an environmental advisor to international NGOs and multilateral institutions such as Greenpeace, WWF International, and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. He received his PhD from Hamburg University with a work on German plant collecting missions during the 20th century in their changing political context. His habilitation at Freiburg University on conflicts around airport noise won the Carl William Kapp Award for Ecological Economics in 2005. His current research broadly explores issues of political ecology, environmental justice, and the cultural dimensions of urban and coastal natures. His latest research publications include papers on urban climate adaptation in Southeast Asian cities and scenario making in Peruvian fisheries. So I think very, very distinguished keynote speaker, Mr. Dr. Michael Flitner. I invite you to now address the workshop.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me now? I saw that some comments were made about the audio. Can you hear me, Vikram?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael, I can hear you.
It's good enough. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation, and thank you for setting up this interesting event. Thank you in particular to Ajiri and Katarina for instructing me how to proceed. And dear fellows and colleagues, I was also impressed to see the broad background and highly interesting background of the participants when I had a quick look at the bio. So I was sort of humbled to give a talk to you into this wide topic. I will give you a short introduction to this topic only today and focus a bit on the role of research in fostering sustainability in the context of the blue economy. I will obviously not try to give a detailed overview to this huge topic, nor will I go into much detail with regard to the sectoral ramifications that are opening up in the marine realm. Rather, I will focus on some questions of sustainability, some conceptual questions in that context. Now I will try to move the presentation forward. Yes, here it is. Here it comes. This is the title. Can you see it as well, I hope? Now I have to find out how to move it forward. Yes, okay, I also find that. Here you will see the rough steps that I'm going to take. I'll stay for a minute with the definition of what we understand by the blue economy. Then I go into some issues of sustainability and livelihoods, and finally try to focus that up around the question of research needs and particular challenges. Okay, what is the blue economy? By the way, if you think about taking notes, you'll receive the slides afterwards. So make the notes having in mind that you will have all the material available afterwards. So what is the blue economy? At first go, if you look around and see these manifold reports popping up everywhere, if you see the videos in the internet, if you see the slides that you can easily find everywhere, you have to admit it's a really discursive wave, I would call it, to use that picture, that has built up over the last decade or so, or last 5 to 10 years. And now it effectively links very diverse set of actors. Here I've chosen 3 of them: the Club of Rome, the European Commission in the middle, and the second largest Swiss private bank, Credit Suisse, to the right. And they all talk about this blue economy. It seems to be the next big thing, and there seems obviously a very broad set of actors interested in it. So let's stick with a public actor for a moment. I'll go with the European Union for a definition. And here the context that the European Union gives, here the European Commission, is very economic. Yeah? It represents roughly 5 million jobs, generates almost 500 billion a year. And content-wise, it is defined here in 5 areas. And this is very similar if you go through the publications. They mention particularly aquaculture, coastal tourism, marine biotech, ocean energy, and seabed mining. You will find slight differences when you look to other actors, but very often these sectors are mentioned. I think they're usually always in there. Yet you will also find a second dimension usually. That is a kind of knowledge dimension or knowledge and planning management dimension to the blue economy. Here again, quoting from the EC document, access to information about the sea, they mention as a first point. Then maritime spatial planning to make the management of the sea more efficient. And third, what they call maritime surveillance, to give authorities a better picture of what is happening at sea. So the blue economy is not just let's say, bringing to the market of certain goods and services, but also the knowledge and the capability, to building up of the capability to know more about the marine realm, and to control it more, if you take the term surveillance. Then third, and that's probably a first try on my side, there seems to be kind of an intrinsic link to the green economy. It's often shaped as the next step of the green economy. You know, that in the terrestrial, you have that division between the so-called old economy or classical economy, and then you say there's a shift towards a greener economy, you know, natural capital, sustainability, and so on. And in the blue economy, it's not quite clear, is it all green, or is it the different types of economies apply to the marine realm? It could be only in the lower right corner. You say it's only a part of the maritime economy, but very often you get the impression that the blue economy is green, so to speak. However, as you all know from your backgrounds, that's probably not so sure. Here's a picture that was in BBC News 2 days ago on mangroves, because it was a global mangrove day, mangrove conversion into aquaculture. And then you would see that it's probably not so clear that the blue economy is automatically a green thing. You will have your own examples. A bit more ambitious take has been coming from some theoretical thinkers like Dick Heron and others that have talked about the blue economy moment that we see happening now. Here the quote from Marlin and Barbesgard: "The present blue economy moment marks the beginning of a reconfiguration required to overcome the tensions generated by the UNCLOS compromise." So that something seems to be going on that they call a reconfiguration. They say a certain thing is happening right now. What do they mean by this? The UNCLOS, as most of you will know, is the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea that has been devised and elaborated over a long time, spanning from the 1970s effectively to the 1990s, for nearly 20 years until it entered into force. And what they say is that this difficult balance that is in that UNCLOS mechanism is sort of being reconfigured at the moment. So it's at disposition, so to speak, that a new compromise or political compromises will be needed or are being worked out at the moment. So what is this balance that we have in the UNCLOS mechanism? Not to make it too complicated, I think there's two big issues that are being addressed here. On the one hand, some have termed it the biggest enclosure in the history of mankind, because effectively nation states have sort of claimed a much bigger space for their control and practical ownership in establishing these exclusive economic zones. Yeah, so this 200-mile zone around their territories, and have said this is sort of national in many respects, or is owned and controlled by us. On the other hand, this convention tries to establish also certain freedoms and access to the seabed and guaranteeing mobilities across the oceans, corridors, and so on. So we have an inner tension in this mechanism between, let's say, enclosure and mobilities. And on the other hand, this tension was largely shaped between a second, say, contradiction at those times between the geopolitical north and the south, that was devised around the concept of the common heritage of mankind. So the general idea was that what can be found in the sea, especially on the sea floor, mineral resources and probably also oil, to a certain extent, would be owned by humanity, let's put it simply. It would be the common heritage of mankind, meaning that if someone has the means to exploit it, in particular if industrialized countries have the means to exploit it, then they would have to share, to a certain extent at least, the technologies that they use, the access, and even the benefits that they can reap from these resources. So there are also duties coming in that concept. And obviously that was a huge debate around that. And while UNCLOS developed from the early negotiations in the 70s, there was a lot of influence still by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, and let's say a very development-friendly approaches in the 70s. And they kind of permutated through the 80s, in the early 90s, to a much more market-oriented scheme. And I think these tensions are still visible in that instrument. And you can see the present blue economy moment as an attempt to reconfigure that or reinterpret this mechanism. Okay, if we take that as a starting point, what about sustainability in that reconfiguration? I think in talking about sustainability obviously raises very broad issues again, and whether you look at, let's say, the very common perspective of ecological sustainability, or whether you also look at social, economic, or also cultural issues of sustainability. as we're talking about the blue economy, I'll stay a bit in the social economic realm. Obviously, what we see is, in economic terms, different types of new enclosures and privatization regimes happening in the last decade. Yeah? If you look to fisheries, these new mechanisms with individual quota. If you look to deep sea mining, these first attempts of the Nautilus in these international areas. If you look the large negotiations that you have under the Convention of Biological Diversity about genetic resources and ownership in genetic resources, in particular in these so-called areas beyond national jurisdiction, ABNJ. That means those areas that are outside the exclusive economic zones. So you see that there are enclosures happening at the moment. And there's clearly a trend towards, let's say, enhanced extractivism, sometimes also termed blue grabbing. Yeah, that's so the blue economy sort of enters into the livelihoods of communities. At the same time, I think it's also important to note that we have kind of new geopolitical divides. Obviously, the role of big former, I would say, developing countries, players like India, and this is why we are also having these workshops, I guess. And China and so are becoming very important in a global perspective, and are showing in different ways also their will to take more control of the oceans. I mean, China is a very good example. If we look at the conflicts in the South China Sea, so it's probably not so easy, or not so easy. It wasn't easy either, but it's not the same kind of geopolitical situation that we had in the 70s that we have today. And I think this kind of is a second component of this reconfiguration. Oh, it doesn't seem to work. Okay. When we follow that, we also have to note that the growth paradigm is very strong. Yeah? If you go to the internet and look for things about the blue economy, you will very often read immediately about blue growth. Yeah? So the idea of the economy and growth are linked very tightly. And a big question that comes up to me is what can be learned from the debates around the growth paradigm in other areas, you know, like the degrowth or post-growth, or that focus very much more on the quality of life and the quality of community socialities and good life. Yeah, the Spanish or Latin American debate about buen vivir, or similar debates that I've heard from India. And this has led to several authors asking how socio-political ideas could enter into this debate, yeah? Or as Ertuğ Hajmichael say, bringing back politics into the blue economies. Obviously, one big link, so to speak, is where all sustainability issues converge at the moment, is the debate around the sustainable development goals that have been shaped by the United Nations context. And there is one Sustainable Development Goals 14 that most of you will know, that focuses on the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, of the seas and marine resources for sustainable development. All these very broad goals have been specified by a list of targets, and I only put up the first 3 targets here. I think it's a list of 10. Just to give you an impression, target 1 is reduce marine pollution of all kinds. Target 2 would be sustainably manage and protect coastal and marine ecosystems, and target 3 to address the impact of ocean acidification. So, and the list goes on along similar issues. So the focus is very much on environmental issues, more narrowly speaking. It's not so much on the blue economy or on the development of marine and ocean issues in this goal. Now, a number of people, experts, specialists, have looked into how this is linked into the broader picture of the sustainability context in the United Nations, in the other SDGs in particular, and they have gone through the other SDGs and tried to elaborate where are there positive synergies, where are positive linkages, where it's probably also some competition, or where they see potentially problems arising between these SDGs. And that's then where the economy and the social issues clearly come in. And going through their list, I'm not sure you can see that on that level of resolution here. And then they evaluated each of the targets and looked where are their synergies. Then there's the plus scale that you have up to +3, and where do they see problems or contradictions. They have this red scale. And they identified a number of other SDGs, as you can see: sustainable consumptions, food, poverty, industrial development, and were pretty positive how that fits into the picture. But if we look into more detail, then some of the relationships are also pretty problematic. I've just chosen one to give you an impression. If they looked into the relationship of the ocean SDG towards the sustainable growth and decent work, so I call it the industry SDG. And then you would see that in the first point they say tackling marine pollution, the interaction between these ocean acidification and unsustainable fisheries all reinforce efficient and sustainable consumption and production of resources. So they see a positive interaction. If we limit, let's say, plastic pollution, obviously this is also good for, let's say, fisheries, to put it simple. So they give that a very positive score. And then they come to the other targets, the next one that we've seen. They say taking measures to protect and restore marine and coastal ecosystems might also lead to restrictions for the economy. And that's also very obvious. I mean, if you make protected areas along coast or so, then you cannot build, let's say, these tourism development projects at the same time or things like that. So, and then they have a pretty strong negative correlation, -2. Now, I mean, this is not a big surprise, but it's still quite important to see and to think through. I think that in these sustainability-related processes, also the international process, it becomes very obvious that the blue economy, or what is usually summarized under the blue economy, is not automatically sustainable or something, or creates also a number of new contradictions. If we look, on the other hand, on the literature coming from the blue economy angle, then you will see that it refers only or largely only to the SDG 14. So let's say if you look to the blue economy literature, scientific papers, Lee et al. have done that very systematically, then they found that the other sustainable development goals are addressed to a much lesser extent in these papers, which is probably not a surprise, but some of them are not addressed at all. I will not go too much into that. We can do that in the discussion, but you can see, for example, that here to the right, because that's also mentioned, question of gender issues or question of health, and so that is very pertinent in the context of the blue economy, don't show up at all. So you see that there is a gap in the scientific treatment that is clearly visible here. I think what is lacking, or that leads us also to think that sustainability may be more bottom up, not so much from these big big and heavy economic opportunities, but rather from a livelihoods angle. Yeah, that happens very rarely in the context of the blue economy, centering on human needs and what is often called sustainable livelihoods. Some of you will know this is a perspective developed in the 1990s by people from ODI and British institutes, mainly an actor-centered perspective that takes poverty and vulnerability issues as the starting point, with a broader theoretical background in entitlements, thinking of the Indian economist Amartya Sen and the capabilities approach by Martha Nussbaum and others. And livelihoods, the general idea is to summarize under that term the capabilities and the assets, and both material and social, also cultural assets and activities required for a means of living. And I think that's a very good starting point to also think, and I have the impression that this workshop also tries to ground thinking about the blue economy more in what communities actually are doing when they fish. Here is a picture from eastern Ghana fishers. Such an approach uses the idea of different forms of capital, not only this natural capital that we have seen focused very much in the blue economy and in the SDG number 14, where you think very much about the natural features and the functions and services emerging from that natural capital, but also look into issues, let's say, of education or ocean literacy, you could say, human capital, it's called here. Think about social capital. Yeah, you see these people collaborating here, pulling this boat out together, so they must have certain social institutions, certain feelings of togetherness or cooperation. Then you think about the physical capitals also, yeah, the boat, you also will need certain items to do that, and the net and the rope and stuff like that. And last not least, also the financial capital that actors have to move in a certain realm. Importantly, these actor situation where they target their livelihood or develop strategies that you see here to the right, the livelihood strategies to achieve certain livelihood outcomes, are in that approach contextualized and to, on the one hand, the vulnerability context, you know, what fishers are going through at the moment, for example, as we see it in Peru, but obviously you will also have it in southern India. And so now with the COVID situation, yeah, they have certain shocks, certain vulnerabilities. But on the other side, and I think that's also important for us, you also have a policy context, yeah, a context of policies and institutions. And that exactly is that reconfiguration, these new enclosures, the follow-up and reinterpretation of the UNCLOS process that we're currently seeing. What is here in this some reddish policies, institution, processes box. Then we can ask now, what is characteristic for the social in the coastal and marine, or for the social ecological systems in the coast? And I've compiled here a few factors that you always see repeated in scientific papers, and I added a few others. Now you can start with the biogeophysical resource, so to speak. You would say usually they are harder to get, they are harder to locate. Some are very difficult to access if they're on the sea floor. Some are migrating, you know, like the fish, they are moving around in a huge three-dimensional body. And some are prone to, let's say, rapid environmental change or natural disasters. If you look to the social dimension, more narrowly speaking, then you would also notice that you have traditionally all over the world very high levels of migration and mobility in coastal regions and marine corridors, so to speak. Yeah? So people are moving around quite a bit there, which also lead to certain forms of social capital in that sense that it was mentioned before, because you need other ties and other relationships, and it's also difficult to build certain relationships when you are very mobile. And you have a pervasive poverty that's legendary for small-scale fishers, are often among the poorest in many social settings. And you will have obviously stakeholder conflict with large-scale development along the coast that you see everywhere, and with a moving number of people moving to the coasts all over the world. Yeah, we have now, I think, more than a third of the world population living within 10 or 20 kilometers from the coastline. Institutions, I will not go into that because we've talked about it already, but finally, the economic also has maybe some specific aspects in that you often have a very high amount of let's say, fixed capital in these marine ventures. This already starts with fisheries, where the boat owners take a specific role also in communities and a kind of entrepreneurial role, because for most small users, then these boats are not available, or they don't have the necessary capital. And this is true to a much larger extent when it comes to some of the other activities, like seabed mining technologies, for example, with specialized ships or drilling equipment, also going into the oil industry, cables, wind farms, and so these are all activities that demand a huge amount of capital. And that means they automatically exclude the majority of actors. Apart from large international companies and states, basically nobody can do that. And it also means that the pressure is very high for them to have legal and institutional control and to get these property rights fixed in their idea. And that means also to have this much more detailed and surveilled maritime spatial planning in the context of the blue economy. That's because you're not doing minor things there, but you're investing billions, and that's why you want these questions regulated. A conceptual link and what the natural capital is delivering in that context, and has influenced the debates around sustainability over the last years very much. I got some ideas how I can better see the presentation. Is the idea of ecosystem services. I think many of you will have heard about that as well. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in the year 2005 or so developed this idea that nature sort of is delivering us certain goods and services, as they formulated it, ecosystem services, using this rather economic term, and have classified these services in 4 groups, going from nutrient cycling, from supporting services that are sort of underlying all the other things, to material services like provisioning food, fish, stuff like that, and regulating services. That means how the ocean in that would fetter, let's say, sort of temperatures or store carbon or things like that. And finally, the cultural services that it provides to us, that there may be certain traditionally sacred sites or educational values and stuff like that. This has been also elaborated quite a bit for marine ecosystems, where you have these ecosystem services. Here it's a bit a different take from Barbier and others, where they talk about fish harvests, about genetic material, and so that the ocean is delivering in a way to satisfy then the humans, the human well-being, or is enhanced by these goods and services that are coming from nature. Now there has also developed some criticism on that, and I think in the end we can see that as although it's maybe the most important conceptual underlying idea now of this blue economy, it has been criticized quite a bit as being too, let's say, functionalistic and inherently monetarizing, the marine realm or the nature. That you have this idea that nature becomes a more functional unit towards human use. And this monetarization can be highly problematic. Here I've adapted a quote from Kull, changed it myself a little bit. Creating a combined unit of measurement for services as different as carbon storage, beach tourism, or fish harvests contains many difficulties, both practical and ethical. So that means that the idea of defining these very different things as services and beginning to compare them or to link them by monetarization is not only very challenging in practical terms, but it's also quite doubtful because you start playing out the livelihoods that we've discussed before against, let's say, profit, for example, or the global environment. Okay, moving forward to research needs and challenges. Why would we? I mean, the oceans, I think, are being framed at the moment as one of the grand challenges, yeah? And that means we cannot just functionally go about it and say, okay, we do the same thing that we did everywhere. It's the same. No, it's not the same. They play a huge role in the environmental issues. They play a huge role for fantasies of the future economy and so on. So we have to go into new conceptual realms. How? I think we also have to take into account that we're moving ever more towards new forms of knowledge production. In particular, transdisciplinarity, that you say it's not only about scientists working with other scientists or about Indian scientists working with German scientists, but it's also the collaboration of scientists with non-science actors that becomes ever more important in the definition of problems, already in the approach to research and in the development of answers to these problems. And what is probably also moving, because I think we see in many realms of the sciences at this moment new debates around epistemology and ontology that also make the objects that we look at more slippery. I will not go into existing social ecological approaches, but simply introduce that I see a big thing coming up, so to speak, which is the debates from the environmental humanities that have influenced so far not very much the environmental debate, but they are beginning to influence it ever more. I call this a cross-cutting slant. So it's an emerging academic field that we see there that comes from a number of different angles, history, philosophy, anthropology, also some gender studies, post-colonial studies that going into that, and it has been summarized by Rose et al. That they all direct our attention or redirect our attention more towards what he summarized as meaning, value, responsibility, purpose. Yeah? So it's not so much more about numbers, fungibilities, relations, money, but here more meaning, value, responsibility, purpose. And I think this brings much more to the fore than we ever had normative questions. Yeah, which nature do we want? Which sea? Which coast? And it brings also the knowledge question into a new perspective. What do we know? What can we know? What do different cultures know? Yeah, what about the role of so-called indigenous or non-Western knowledges? I think we can hear more of that here from the participants. as well. I think this shift, this abstract shift, or theoretical shift is very visible in different frontiers that we don't have to discuss here. It's in the body reproduction sphere, but it's also the ocean is one of these frontiers, the ocean and the deep sea floor as a new horizon, so to speak, or a new frontier. And in the debates, obviously, on a more conceptual level around the Anthropocene and the sixth extinction wave. And that brings also a much bigger role than we've seen before for creative dimensions in dealing with nature and for emotional and affective dimensions in research. Okay, implications more concretely. Trying to draw that up, I think we will have a farewell to the classical environmental policy approaches. It's not so much about that. I think the instruments that we have developed for, let's say, terrestrial ecology or for valuing nature or so, I think this is not what research is, or where the most interesting research is going on at the moment. Then what I've called limitations of capital and nature. You know, nature as the big referent out there is also becoming ever more unclear, so to speak, or as something untouched. You know, in the Anthropocene, by definition, there is no such thing as a nature that we can take as a point of reference or something we can reconstruct or so. We all know, and Sven Bergman knows best, who is also here today, that very small particles of plastic and debris are all over the oceans. So there is no state of nature that we can easily reconstruct or refer to. But the natures that we have are a result already of very different assemblages and multiple human and other than human practices. Okay, I'll drop the other point. Research need finding abstract starting point. Bennett recently, they said, yeah, we need at all scales insights from an investment in interdisciplinary ocean science to inform international negotiations, design ocean policy, shape blue economy initiatives, and monitor social and environmental impacts and outcomes. And then he reminds us the upcoming UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and I think this is the context also we have to refer to here, offers an important opportunity to identify how natural and social sciences can be employed and mobilized to enable the realization of a sustainable and equitable blue economy. What I was trying to point out in my more theoretical remarks before is that this will not be a simply additive option, in the sense that if we do social science, we do natural science, then we add it up. But these questions of value, they cross-cut this divide, and there's also not a sort of untouched natural science approach that we can follow. Regarding the blue economy, I see particularly 4 points, or I'm trying to highlight 4 points. I think we really should study the effects of the blue economy on the international sustainability agenda. And we should go beyond SDG 14 in doing so. Just one example, health. If you see the COVID crisis now into small-scale fisheries, that's huge, at least in Latin America, because the states have begun to regulate differently large-scale and small-scale fisheries. And small-scale fisheries have huge problems. I think we should go into a bottom-up driven sustainability research and make livelihoods perspectives stronger in the blue economy, and I think this workshop can contribute to that. Obviously, new research is needed around the new enclosure versus these old ideas of common heritage. How does that principle develop, and what can we keep, or what should we keep of these common ideas? Yeah, and the key example is the question of genetic resources. And finally, I think, and I've said that before, that we should also engage with the post-growth paradigm widely, in a wide understanding. that means explore a concept also of quality of life, of when we hear, or as Ashish Kothari has said, ecological Swaraj. I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly. Okay, with these points, a final quote from Marlene Barbesgard. Bearing in mind the complex ways in which geopolitics and political economy intersect in the oceans, there is considerable scope to become much more theoretically and conceptually engaged in this debate. I think that's sort of my final statement, and I thank you for your attention and look forward to your
Michael, thank you so much for this
debate
really rich presentation. I certainly think I'm going to go back to your slides a few times, and you've kind of woven in literature from different domains and fields and tied it together very well. And I think fundamentally you are asking us to interrogate the whole idea of the blue economy and where it's coming from and what that actually means for local livelihoods and ecology. So yeah, excellent. I'm going to sorry, I've just been asked to turn on my camera. There we go. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so thanks very much for that, Michael. And I'm going to now request our participants to kind of pose their questions. There is a function by which I think Adishri explained to us how you can technically do that. So hopefully you all understood. And yeah, so look forward to some questions for Michael to kickstart the discussion. So raise your hand feature on the top there. Okay. Oh yeah, I think there is one from Farhad Naz, and then I see Lata. Lata next. So Farhad, you want to go? Farhad Naz, over to you. Farhad, you're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much, Professor Michael, for an interesting presentation. Just a quick query. You know, I'm really fascinated. It was a very intellectually stimulating presentation. Can you just please elaborate a little bit on ecological Swaraj?
Oh, I would rather leave that to Vikram, probably. I'm just aware of one paper that I also mentioned here by Ashish Kothari and other, where they tried to bring together these ideas of let's say, the green economy and good living that are discussed in many parts of the world with different philosophical backgrounds and compare a bit the sources.
So my interpretation of that is about there is an element of being able to decide and take decisions about your own local environment. I think one of the issues that I find with the blue economy discourse that it is definitely a discourse about growth, but then we come in and say but sustainability, but fundamentally I think something like ecological Swaraj is asking us to fundamentally rethink that paradigm and really see how we can take decisions around the blue economy that kind of give a right to self-determination almost to the communities that live around the economy. And I think that's really critical. You know, at least, so I mean, I have in past been quite critical of the idea of the blue economy, largely because I do think that it prioritizes state-led large-scale development and corporate interests more often than not. So I think and it's kind of reclaiming the space for individuals. That's how I read it. That concept, and it's about epistemology also. It's about how you study and how you know.
Yes, yes. I would also see it very much. I mean, I also know it only from earlier Gandhian debates. I think where it's very much the self-government. Basically, thank you for adding that up.
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. Yes, thank you very much. And yes, thank you, Dr. Michael. It was a really rich and very informative session, presentation. Just since you have mentioned about the blue economy, and yeah, I would like to know, like, in your opinion, like, considering the present scenario of the pandemic COVID-19 all over the globe, like, how can we use, or can we utilize this blue economy towards boosting the economy, like, you know, at local level at least? Like, what is your opinion or any suggestion towards this?
That's a big question. I mean, on the one hand, we have seen that we have promises also for medical solutions and so on that involve genetic materials that we find in coral reefs and stuff like that. So you have a lot of, let's say, at this point in time, largely fantasies or ideas how the immense richness of biological diversities that we find in the oceans. In fact, it's larger than what we find in the Amazon or those places that have harbored or given shape to these fantasies in the past. So there are some ideas how that could be developed, but if we look at what is factually happening at this point in time, I mean in 2020 summer, then it's so that some of those that are communities that are tied into the ocean use are hurt very badly by what's happening there. And we see that in Latin America. I mean, they have difficulty going out because the state controls what they can do and has blocked part of the fisheries, and then they have conditions of work where they stay together very closely on the boats, and where they market the fish and so on. So they are hurt disproportionately. And you could say they are much more on the problem side at this point in time. So I think what it can teach us maybe that the old economy or our old relationship with nature that we've had in the, let's say, old green economy cannot be simply extended, cannot and should not be simply extended to the ocean. Then we'll create problems on an even bigger scale. So I'm not yet optimistic to say that's the solution at this point in time.
Thanks. I'm going to ask Paltu Kumar. Paltu, do you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Michael, for your nice presentations. It's really enriched me a lot about blue economies. So I have few information to share before coming to the questions. Like I stay in the West Bengal. And my research field, basically, I am a biotechnologist. I work in marine biotechnology work in Sundarban mangrove in West Bengal. And what I understand with continuation previous concern like COVID, along with recently this populations around the Sundarban mangrove largely suffered with another difficulties like thunderstorm for using with huge population loss and economy loss. But I don't think in my opinion the populations around the Sundarban mangrove highly suffering with this COVID as well as the Ebola-like typhoon. So I don't think in coming 2 to 3 years, blue economy will be very much effective in this area. This is my observation recently, what I understand from those populations. I have worked with those populations very closely in last couple of years. And coming to my questions, how the genetic diversity is closely related with the blue economies. I'm not very much clear about that. Like genetic diversity under the sea largely depend on the blue economy. This is if you enlightened some point on those issues.
I'm not sure I got your question right. Yeah, I'm not sure I got your question really right. And I'm certainly not an expert about Sundarban mangroves and what can be achieved there. I mean, but if I take the second part, I mean the role of these genetic resources in economic development. I mean, if we see realistically, that will be resources that go through a lot of science. Let's put it that way. You have to collect samples. You have to analyze them, then you sometimes extract certain secondary products from them, and then you try to find the genetic makeup that produces these secondary components, and then probably reintroduce it into fermenters or into bacteria to produce these components. Yeah, so that is a very long and complex development. So I would say for the everyday users that you work with, they will probably have access also in traditional medicine to some of these components or use some plants, and this is indeed one of the lead strategies that scientists use when they go to collect certain samples. But on the other hand, this, let's say, more industrial style use of the same components or the use of the genetic material is obviously a very heavy science-driven business, and so it can only deliver, I would say, goods or well-being indirectly through some kind of rent system, or that you take people that help you as parataxonomists and pay them. That's what has been done in Latin America. That then you get direct salary transfer or something like that. But then to cash in on the real value of these potential drugs or so, that's very difficult in economic terms. And that's why the debates are also so fierce about the use of that material in these areas beyond national jurisdiction, because their countries can not.
I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on. There were two questions in the chat. One is a very simple question about the blue economy versus the ocean economy, and does the blue economy consider other forms of water bodies, like other than marine? Maybe I can just quickly answer that. I mean, my sense is that the blue economy is almost the same as the ocean economy, but I'm not entirely sure. I think that's a technical definition issue. And then there is an example of blue economy. Somebody's Yang is asking for an example of blue economy companies. So those were the two questions in the chat, and then you might want to take them up, Michael. But I'm going to let the next question, which is Siddharth Chakravarti, to pose his next question. Siddharth, over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Flitner, for your presentation. I'm just going to try and pick up on your last 2 points, which were about geopolitics and political economy, and tie it into the question that was posed earlier about ecological Swaraj. I mean, I think because this is a collaborative workshop between Indian and German participants, I think the question of caste within communities in India as the political economy of this country would definitely be on par, if not more, alongside the section on gender. So I think there needs to be something that needs to revolve around research in India when we specifically talk about frameworks. You might want to comment, or that's just a comment from my side, but also about geopolitics. What we're seeing in the Pakistan-China economic corridor, or what we're seeing with the ports in Sri Lanka. It's primarily a geopolitics between America and China, where India is now, getting tied into taking positions regarding Israel and Palestine, about America, and those things are changing as well. And given the question of differentiation along caste and gender line within the country, there's the larger narrative of the nation state in geopolitics, and then there's the differentiation within the nation state as well. And I think this really complicates research agendas and work on the blue economy. So if you've got anything to comment on that, even as we go into our breakout sessions, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yes, thank you for this remark. I see it more as an additional complication, so to speak, that you bring in, but absolutely rightly you bring it in. I mean, this all leads us to be careful thinking too much in these win-win or triple win scenarios, or so that it's nice for everybody because we get these nice ecological solutions and all the groups profit and all the nations profit and so on. But I think that remains a challenge. If we see it more as a frontier, then we all know, frontiers, this is pretty ugly at frontiers, if you think about the Westerns that you see on TV. I mean, that means nations, groups, actors, companies, and so position themselves and fight each other to a certain extent. And I think it's a huge challenge to make that sustainable in a social way, and that clearly includes all kinds of divisions. Yeah, you say in India, caste may be a very important thing to think about. Yeah, gender, race, or so, whatever the social divisions are, it has the potential to deepen dividing lines. And I think this is why we are here, also to think what are potential avenues and research avenues too.
So I don't see more hands, and I think that's not a bad thing. There'll be okay. So maybe we'll take one last question from Sohini, and then and then we'll move on in the agenda. Okay, maybe two last questions. Sohini and Swati, please both of you state your questions, and then after Michael has heard both of you, I'll get back to him.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sohini and then Swati. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Flitner. That was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question will be, I have been just reading up on blue economy, and I especially concentrate on coastal communities. And what we can see, what really intrigued me in your presentation was how you talked about reconfigurations. And it is very interesting, because blue economy as it exists till date in South Asia or Southeast Asia, it is essentially, it's in a very nascent stage, right? So it's essentially a MOU of sorts that India has with Bangladesh or say any other country. And it's a say documentation of centralized practices. But when we are seeing their implementation on ground, the focus is more towards commercialization, and the sustainability practices that we are really seeing is more from the local people. So how do you think that we can bridge this gap, from central to local? How can we bring about a synergy in blue economy approaches from policy to implementation? That will be my question to you. I hope I'm clear.
But Now,
should I answer directly?
Yeah, but so maybe Michael, you can answer this, and then we can close the Q&A session.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you to the participants. I wish I could stay with you in the workshop. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you to the participants. I wish I could stay with you in the workshop for longer, because I think it's very promising, and the real discussions will only begin obviously after that talk, and I'm glad if I gave you some ideas how what could be interesting discussions, and it's not more that I intended. So I'm a bit sad that we don't have this real existence, so to speak, in a workshop where we can exchange further these ideas. And I think you made a very important point that you said, on the one hand, there is something out there already. It already exists to a certain extent and has also many sustainable components already in what exists. On the other hand, there's this very much this focus on commercialization of the new actors that come into the play. And I think we must be wary of that idea, you know, I mean, we could say it also has a very ideological function, the blue economy. If you think what very different things you lump together under one term there. You know, if you have these small-scale fishers or people that collect certain grasses on the millions to drill 1 kilometer, that will be part of the blue economy, and then it will be transnational companies that invest billions to drill 1 kilometer below the sea. And that is, it's a bit doubtful, yeah, if we say then also, okay, there is already parts of the blue economy. It sort of sometimes blurs our view on what is really happening. And I think we have to be very careful and very critical with this, let's say, strong trend to commercialize things, or only to take things important that are that become commercial. That's also the search for companies that have new ideas or something like that. Yes, you're absolutely right. There is a huge blue economy, and so many people have their livelihoods related to water and to the ocean. And we should be careful in developing that and see what are the really ideas that help people, to control their livelihoods and to improve them also, I say, not just to keep them. And I think that's a good guidance also that you give for the discussions. So thank you, and thank you to the other participants.
Thank you so much, Swati. I mean, we just got your question, but it's an important question. It's a big one. Let me try and answer it on my behalf of Michael later in one of the sessions. But this Q&A, I do want to close here unless Michael, you want to type something into the chat box to Swati's question. But I think we'll and so unfortunately, Swati, we'll have to take that in the discussion, and I'd like to close the session. And I think thank Michael for a wonderful presentation and his extremely excellent input. Yeah, look forward to being. I already typed in a separate chat message to Katrina that I want to work with Michael in the future, and so yeah. So I think this was really great presentation. And the takeaway I want to take, just one point from this for the future conversation, is that I think the sustainable livelihood framing is quite interesting, and it in some sense helps us think about vulnerability and local needs in a way that we can begin to deconstruct this kind of a more top-down economic vision of the blue economy. So yeah, so look forward to taking that from your message, and thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for being with us.